And thank you for having me. My name's Amy Ford. I'm Deputy Director of Derby Research School. And what I'm going to run through with you this afternoon is looking at what is effective professional development and the guidance report that's being given out by the EEF. So we're going to get started in 10 minutes so that you may have some questions. Please feel free to put those in the chat and I'll answer those at the end. It's quite a large document, but I'm going to try my best to summarise this for you and some of the key takeaways that you might want to start looking at. So we know that the professional development guidance report has come from us having the standard for teachers' professional development. We have these standards, so I've got those on the screen for you to have a look at. So we know that it's focused on improving and evaluating people outcomes, and we need to ensure that any professional development we do in our settings should include collaboration, expert challenge. It needs to be a sustained programme over time rather than a one-off event, and to be again prioritised by school leadership. Quite a few schools are again coming up into the Ofsted window, and we have had some of our schools being asked questions around CPD, so that will pop up in your Ofsted. And these are a couple of questions that we've seen at the moment, so I'll give you a couple of minutes just to read those. Okay, so it's really useful to think about, bearing in mind we've got the standards and we've got the Ofsted questions. Why is the professional development guidance report useful? How would the resource support you around your thinking and answering these questions from Ofsted, and how you show that you're using those in your setting? So what we've got in the guidance report, so professional development can come under a lot of different things, but what they count it as in the guidance report is the following. So it's something that's focused more on developing teacher ability. So we're not saying that the activities on the screen aren't important or necessary, but the professional development guidance report really focuses on that developing teaching ability. And what they found is overall that professional development programs that include more mechanisms, which I'm going to move on to in a moment, have a higher impact on our students. And it suggests that for professional development to be impactful and effective and sustained, all of those things that we need to add into our standards, and all of those things that also help us in answering those questions for Ofsted, how we sustain it, how we engage, how we move forward, come down to some mechanisms. So the report, the guidance report has 3 recommendations. The first one is around when you're selecting some professional development. So this might be provided by somebody else and isn't necessarily designed by you in your setting. They kind of recommend that you analyze that professional development in terms of the mechanisms, in how many mechanisms are involved in it, does this fit our school need, and is it balanced? The second recommendation goes through the actual mechanisms, and I'll show you what they are. So these are the things that they suggest should be in all professional development to ensure we have high impact on our pupils. And then the third one is about the fit and feasibility for our setting. So yes, we might have these professional development programs and we've selected them, but how do we ensure that they're implemented effectively within our setting, and also ensure that we're developing training that meets the needs of our school and students? So what we have are these 4 mechanisms. This is our recommendation 2 from the guidance report, and it suggests that for us to have effective professional development, so any training that we deliver, it needs to have these 4 kind of categories of what they've put it in. So we've got building knowledge, we need to motivate teachers, we need to develop teacher techniques and embed practice. And they call them mechanisms because we've got these cogs that fit together, and as we put them next to one another, we can keep moving that training forward, and it keeps rotating, it keeps moving, and hopefully it doesn't come to a standstill. So if we have a look through this at the building knowledge for A, the aim of this group of mechanisms is to help a teacher gain a new evidence-based understanding of teaching, their students or themselves. So when designing and delivering professional development, it's really important to present new knowledge in ways which support understanding. And as we know, we've done this as senior leaders, it's really important to pay attention to how we structure and build the knowledge and what is actually taught in the programme. And the 2 mechanisms they identify here that's really key is how do we manage cognitive load of our training, and where do we revisit prior learning? The second section is B, this group of mechanisms is about, once we've built that teacher knowledge, they still need to be motivated to act upon that knowledge. And 3 mechanisms which have underlying support for this stage are setting and agreeing goals, presenting information from a credible source, and reinforcement after the progress. So the setting and agreeing goals, this is substantially increases the likelihood of behaviour change if we ask our teams to set goals, and that's more likely that their performance will improve as well. The next mechanism is information from a credible source. So again, where do we get the information and where is it derived from? And they're more likely to change their practice if they've got the reason why and the credibility behind that. And then the final mechanism is providing affirmation and reinforcement. So how often do we either verbally or non-verbally praise and support our staff as we move through a change? We've got the third set of mechanisms, which is all about developing teacher techniques. And again, this is after building the knowledge and motivating them to act on, it's how do we give them the tools required to take action and change the practice. So for example, they identify instructing them how to perform a technique, arranging that social support, modeling it, monitoring and providing feedback throughout, and then offering lots of opportunities to rehearse it. And then finally, we've got the last section, which is D, and this is about how we embed it. So again, how do we continue to support behaviour change and improve teaching? And they've got 4 mechanisms there, which is about providing prompts and cues. So obviously we get a lot of different priorities sometimes. We might just need prompting to continue with our action planning. Monitor it. Again, thinking about whether staff are reflecting on it in regular meetings, that kind of thing, and offering context-specific repetition. So if you're offering training and it's not in a classroom environment, how do we give them opportunity to keep practicing that? So they're the 4 mechanisms. They're not saying in the guidance report that we should use all of them, but they are suggesting that actually it would be really useful to have a mechanism from each of those 4 categories. And the more mechanisms that you have, the more impactful and the more balanced it is. So it's really key to have a balanced design. So for example, they talk about how we affect behaviour change. We've got the 4 categories at the top where our mechanism sits, so the building knowledge, motivating and developing teacher techniques. And they talk about having some cogs, so some of those mechanisms from each category together to make a balanced design. And if one category, so one group of mechanisms is missing, potentially the likely outcome of your training is that staff might revert to old habits if we're not giving them the opportunity to embed the practice. Again, if we aren't developing teacher techniques and giving them the tools to enact the knowledge and then giving them opportunity to practice, again, we get the knowing doing gap. Again, here we've got no motivation, no implementation. There might be misapplication if we've not effectively built knowledge. And again, the balanced design is if we can have mechanisms from each of those categories, then potentially it may work. The next section I've got for you is just some takeaways for you to think about and maybe share back in your settings to delve into this a little bit more depth. There's a think piece here where it gives a context of a school and the way that they have approached professional development around it. And we've put some questions along the side here that you might want to take away and maybe just think about those mechanisms. Does the way this person has approached professional development really think about those 4 areas and the different mechanisms that will move it forward? What might need to be continued, what might need to be dropped? And it might just be a useful way to reflect on whether your approach to professional development is similar to this or different, or whether you might want to adapt that slightly based on the guidance report. On the website, I've got some links at the end of this. Downloads, tools and resources is a really useful section of the website around the effective professional development. And again, these could be key takeaways for you to share with your teams and really reflect on with the members of your staff that design and implement professional development. There's a tool where you can think about a change or an initiative that you'd like to drive forward, and it gives you a framework to start discussing that as a senior leadership team. So we have, what's the development trying to solve? What knowledge do we need to add? What's the behaviour we want to develop? And then ultimately, what's the impact on the pupil behaviour? And then we can really drill down into whether it's effective and start thinking of those mechanisms. So it's a great format there. They also have a completed version, which is always really useful to have a model. There's a reflective document on the website as well. And again, this just thinks about maybe some professional development you've delivered at school and in your setting, and you might want to think about what could we do to improve it? How did we go about it? Evaluating it, was it as effective? Did we need to add or take away mechanisms? That kind of thing. And then again, how do we ensure we've got a balanced design? It puts those 4 categories into a document like this. It gives you some prompt questions. So again, a really useful tool to sit and think about the way you would like to approach and develop professional development in your setting. And again, another useful aspect of it is they do give you a completed version, and this is around how to manage cognitive load. The irony, as I've just given you a very in-depth summary of the professional development guidance report. And that is it, hopefully to time bar 1 minute, where this will come through to you. And again, all of these links take you straight through to any of those tools and any of the information that I've just shared with you.
That is phenomenal timekeeping, and thanks so much for those quick links and key takeaways. Thank you so much for sharing. Colleagues, does anyone have any questions for Amy regarding what resources she shared, or any follow-up questions or reflections to share before we move on to our next speaker? I want to make sure everyone has a chance to share any questions. I think you may have bamboozled them, Amy.
I think there's a lot there.
there's a huge amount to take away, and what I love is those activities, those think pieces for reflection after the fact, to really mobilize that into how do we make choices as a senior leadership team and leaders of schools looking ahead to the next academic year. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Fabulous.